One more study. This is worth talking about. Youth suicide rates are higher in states with high gun ownership rates. This is according to a team at a Boston University School of Public Health. Household gun ownership was the single biggest predictor of youth suicide rate in a state. The single biggest predictor. And I think the response that, I'm just trying to imagine the response that people on the right are giving to something like this. Well, that's just because guns are more effective. Well, it might be a good idea to get rid of the guns. It's weird because people kill people, guns don't kill people, yet this correlates. It is well known that people with access to a gun are far more likely to complete suicide. Some data had suggested that gun ownership in general was associated with higher suicide rates. The research looked at some questions. Isn't it possible that gun households are systemically different from non-gun households? Right? So that it's just a total coincidence that there's something about the desire to have guns that leads everybody in the house to be depressed, and that the guns don't cause the increase in suicide rate. It just happens that people who are suicidal tend to have more guns, which is also not such a good idea.
That's not a great stat.
That's not no, but yeah. And the researchers looked at the question: is it possible there are just higher rates of depression and suicidal ideation in a gun household? Even if that was the case, that would be a pretty compelling argument to limit gun ownership.
To make you think of killing yourself?
Well, no. That there are a certain percentage of people out there who want to commit suicide. Maybe we should just prevent them from having guns so they're not so successful. That to me seems like it. But
I want to see how they vote first.
They didn't. That turned out to be not to the case. For each 10 percentage point increase in household gun ownership, the youth suicide rate increased by 27%. This was in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine. The only other factors that were associated with the overall youth suicide rates were suicide attempt rate and the percentage of youth who were Native American. So, for example, in Alaska, the youth suicide rate is 15 or so suicides per 100,000 people. This is under the age of 19. And just about 60% of households have guns. In South Dakota, the suicide rate is 14.9 per 100,000. Again, just under 60% have homes had guns in 2004. In New York and New Jersey, suicide rate is 2.6 or so per 100,000. And you have rates of 20% households have guns. And in New Jersey, 11.4%. I suppose you could look at this and say, all right, well, let me look at what upstate New York is. Because that's maybe more like it is in a place like South Dakota on some level, right? Maybe it's just depressing to be in a place where it's so rural. And, but that's the fact. The availability of firearms is contributing to an increase in the actual number of suicides, not just leading youth to substitute other means of suicide for guns. So there you have it. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court is reviewing a case, and we'll talk more about this on the Second Amendment. The case itself is narrow in its scope in terms of New York City and a particular handgun regulation, but the principles that may come out of it may essentially wipe out the ability for any gun control possible. Period. End of story.